I was lucky enough to be in a government department recently doing a bit of work, and I was speaking to these people, and they were very nice people, and I said, "And what else is in this building?" I said, "Oh, up on the 4th floor, no one's allowed to go in there. The 4th floor became this mythical place where strange things were going on that didn't happen before. But on the 4th floor was the NCSC, which is an organisation that has become incredibly important. We all know what happened with the HSE hack. We all know that the state needs to be protected. And we know, as I said earlier, we need to look after ourselves rather than expecting others to come along. So to tell us a little bit about what they're doing and how important the work is to everybody, the taxpayer, the employees, the citizens of this country. Will you please welcome the Director of the NCSE, Mr. Richard Browne.
Sorry, that's a very 90s reference, which is very fitting. Okay, yes, I know it came out in 1989, sorry. On the album called Doolittle, just for the record. Anyway, moving on. Good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Browne. I'm the Director of the National Cybersecurity Centre. First of all, thanks to Raluca and to SmartTech for the invitation to speak to you again this morning. These events are always interesting. They're always an opportunity to hear what's going on in the world and to hear a slightly different perspective on things. I'm going to cover things from a slightly different perspective today. Usually I go where we were, what we're doing now, what's coming next. I'm going to turn this around a little bit, and I'm going to talk about, first of all, the fact that the 90s are over, and that we're past that point. That the world has changed kind of fundamentally in the last couple of weeks in ways we probably don't fully yet appreciate. Then I'm going to talk about, to a degree at least, what's happened, what we've done collectively to try and redress some of the risks in cybersecurity in the last 10, 15 years. And then I'm going to talk about what this all means. What do we have to do now, collectively and as a state? So where are we going next? So to begin with, and first of all, to check my privilege at the door, I've spent a lot of the last 3 weeks in security conferences and AI conferences in Paris, in Munich, in Warsaw, in Brussels. So I'm coming at this from the perspective of being up close and personal with people who are very, very worried about reality. So what you're about to hear is very cautious, and it's very reflective of the fact that we're very close to very dynamic, chaotic world events, and maybe it won't be that bad, or maybe it'll be worse. So again, this is all a conservative take on everything. So 15 points, or 15 steps for the Radiohead fans in the house. First of all, the 90s are over. What does that mean? It means that the global security environment we've all come to not just understand, but accept as the norm has changed fundamentally. Now, perhaps the US commitment to Europe isn't wavering. Perhaps it is only slightly less than it was. But it is fundamental to all of us to understand that the global security environment that is premised on the idea that America will always come to Europe's aid is fundamentally challenged. Okay? Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, which is the mutual self-defense piece, is the fundamental piece of legal instrumentation that has preserved peace in Europe for 60 or 70 years. That, at the very least, is open to question now, and that's a problem. The second thing we can take with certainty is that Russia is, it appears, convinced and committed to an expansionist course of action. They've invaded Ukraine several times in the recent past. They've invaded Georgia. They've invaded numerous other countries in the region. I've spent a lot of time in the last number of weeks in rooms with people in uniform from all over Europe who are openly convinced of the fact that they will be at war in Eastern Europe again within the next 3 years. Maybe they're wrong. I hope they're wrong. But if they're right, we all have a collective problem. Number 3, Europe is going to have to adapt. It's already adapting. Some of this is in the NATO field. NATO is looking at and refreshing how it does its business. NATO allies are seeking to dramatically increase their defense investment. Great. But what if Article 5 doesn't hold? What if the US continues to roll back on its commitment to Europe? What happens next? Does that mean, for example, that the Article 42.7 commitments in the EU treaties become more defense and security focused? Does that mean the same thing applies to Article 225? Who knows? Does the European Union become a defensive security arrangement? Europe is changing how it thinks about and how it adapts and reacts to global events. Number 4, we can say with certainty that cyber, this complex compound system of systems, which has vulnerabilities at every level, societal, governmental, economic, and so on, remains a significant threat and risk to societies. And it's one that actors are using, the Russian state is using across Europe. It's also very true to say that the Russian state uses this not as hybrid, they don't use the term hybrid, they use the term active measures. They use this as a part of a sequence of measures involving disinformation, involving political action, involving diplomatic action, involving military, old-fashioned military action, involving cybersecurity incidents, involving destructive attacks on critical infrastructure in other areas. So they look at this as a tool in a toolbox that they can use interchangeably to flex, adapt, change, and help to break European societies. That's 4. Number 5, and here's a slightly provocative thing. If you look at Ukraine in the periods, not just since 2022, but even prior, the Russian state has determinedly sought to not be escalatory in their actions. So when they've conducted, as they have, repeated cyber attacks on Ukrainian critical infrastructure, they have been extremely careful, and they've slipped once or twice, in trying to ensure that nothing extends beyond Ukraine. They don't and can't be convinced or convicted or accused of seeking to attack other European Union countries by cyber means. That's because, presumably, they're worried about reciprocal action, potentially even triggering an Article 5 type event. What happens to all of us if that conviction goes away? What happens if that Article 5 conviction goes away? Does that mean that now they're free to extend those attacks into the broader European Union economy? It's an open question, but it's not one we can completely deny given what's happened in the last number of years. So now we've got a new set of problems. The 90s are over, the world has changed, and yet we have these new risk surfaces that we've managed to deal with and, I suppose, get along with to some extent, to manage those risks in a relatively proportionate way. But what if the picture is changing fundamentally? Okay, that's first 5. Second 5. So, as a whole, Europe, the international community, the UN, we've built a series of defensive measures to deal with risks in cybersecurity. I'll take this at a national, European, global level really briefly. So, the first one, every single European Union country has built a national incident response capability. We have in the NCSC. This includes a national cyber emergency response plan we've published. So we have a published national process for dealing with cyber and hybrid emergencies. We've exercised this repeatedly. We exercised it recently in the energy sphere. We exercised it 2 weeks ago in the communications sphere. So simulating what would happen, how the state would react to a complex, rolling series of events involving communications outages, attacks on telecoms infrastructure, and so on. All of this is in place, and it works to a greater or lesser extent. Secondly, we've built the capacity, nationally and collectively, to monitor, detect, and respond to incidents in the broader internet. In other words, we in the NCSC can detect, identify, track developing incidents, threats, themes, issues on the global internet. Okay? If we can do it, lots of countries can do it. That basically means that we have a collective synthetic understanding as to what's happening in the world. Okay? Now, we do this in partnership with others. We do it at a European Union level through groups like the CSERTS network, which is a European CSERTS group. We do it with partners bilaterally like the US, the UK, other European Union countries, countries like Norway, and South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. We also do this multilaterally through entities like NATO. So we're part of the NATO information sharing mechanism. So we have this collective understanding as to what's happening. Great. We also have built, through the CVE process and otherwise, this global capability to detect, manage, and understand vulnerabilities. So the CVE process, which is owned and run by the US government through CISA, it's a minor point of vulnerability, we'll all imagine, is how we track and manage vulnerabilities. Okay, Europe is building something akin to that several years from now under the CRA. But okay, now we have this process. We can understand collectively when we have a CVE what it means. In the NCSC, we regularly, and very regularly at the moment, publish advisories based on CVEs, advising people exactly what to do with a vulnerability, very often in VPN products at the moment. Great. Okay, now we have a collective way of responding to incidents, detecting issues, managing vulnerabilities. Great. We've also built a broad series of regulatory tools right across Europe and globally. In Europe, we have, for example, NIS1. Okay? It was transposed here in September 2018, and that document basically obliges about 125 entities in the state, critical infrastructure mainly, electricity operators, other energy suppliers, transport, healthcare, and so on, to meet a certain set of security requirements. Great. So now we're telling people what they need to do to be secure. Does it work always? Of course not, because it's a compliance-based process, and the bad guys get a voice too. okay? But it's a start. We also have, for example, in the public sector, something called the baseline standard, which is a diluted version, essentially, of ISO 27001 to get public sector bodies on the road to a better compliance model. And then also, we've taken measures in the telecom space specifically to deal with particular vendor-related challenges in mobile networks, 5G particularly, to ensure that we can absolutely trust the country in which the telecommunications infrastructure we use is built, managed, or operated from. If we can't, we've questions to ask, particularly in virtualized mobile networks. We've done all of that. And then we've other things as well in the regulatory space, like GDPR, for example, where states have gone out and collectively decided in Europe to take a series of measures to oblige entities who hold sensitive data to take care of it. And that's resulted, whether we like to accept it or not, because it's happened over 10 years, a sea change in how companies manage and deal with personal information. Great. Number 5, we've also built collectively an industry to support all of this. Industries like SmartTech, an Irish company. In Ireland, for example, we have a huge number of global cybersecurity companies based here. Blue Voyant opened their Cork office again recently. Another multinational company setting up their base in the heart of civilization. Not Dublin, just for the record. All of this means that in the regulatory space, we have a suite of companies in the advisory and compliance space to assist and build capacity and capability in companies. We have a suite of companies who can provide technological services. They can provide antivirus services. They can provide endpoint protection services. We have a developing AI space here. And this is mirrored globally, and particularly in Europe. So we have a collective end-to-end system, starting in the public sector, starting in the national security space, right down through to people in this room who provide the services to clients. Right? Great. We have a functioning system. But it's 2025, and the world is changing. What does all that mean? So before I jump into the last 5 quickly, the other thing to keep in mind here is that we're focused on Russia, which right now seems to be a somewhat sensible place to be. But there are other actors out there as well. Raluca pointed out that Chinese-related or Chinese nexus actors are looking at a 150% increase. Some of that is down to, very bluntly, the widespread proliferation of private sector operators working on behalf of, at the behest of, around the fringes of the Chinese state. In other words, they're trying everything. This is not necessarily always some kind of masterful, coordinated, coherent Volt Typhoon, Flax Typhoon, Salt Typhoon type incident. It's private operators looking to create an advantage to sell to the Chinese state. So we're seeing at that end of the market a fracturing of the cybersecurity market where people are trying things just to sell to the state. Similarly, on ransomware, we're seeing a decrease in the number of payments and the amount of payments. All of the global activities, the things we're talking about, are working on ransomware. It's not going to make it go away, obviously, but the big groups, Black Basta was mentioned, there are others as well, have been collectively taken down and destroyed to an extent by collective law enforcement and security action, by people like us and our partners elsewhere. By the sharing that happens in the background, by the collective understanding of who's doing what, with what, and to whom, the big groups have been targeted. That doesn't mean they're gone. It just means they're driven to a lower level of operation. Some of the work that's been done has been conceptually fantastic and point to the work that the Met have done with the FBI and the National Crime Agency in the UK on Operation Cronus, where they've not just taken down large-scale pieces of infrastructure, they've also gone after and targeted the reputation of the individuals and the groups to ensure that their affiliates will no longer work with them. It's brilliant. It targets the very human heart of the ransomware model. It works. Fantastic. Doesn't mean it'll work forever. These groups will be back. So the point I'm trying to get at before I dive into the next bit is, it looks like we're winning now, but we're winning in very small-scale ways, and the fundamental threats and issues remain. So, last 5. What next? So, at a national level, we have 2 full national cybersecurity strategies complete and delivered, 2015 and 2019. We had a full review of the 2019 strategy in 2023, which resulted in a midterm review, what essentially was a mini-strategy in its own right. Right now, we're starting to work on the next national cybersecurity strategy. That involves, again, a full risk assessment, like we published in 2023. It will involve a public consultation process, and it already involves detailed consultation across government. It also involves work in the context of the revised National Development Plan, which will be published hopefully in July, and it also involves the other programme for government commitments around reviewed and revised national security structures in the state. And while we're at it as well, the development of a Centre of Excellence for Cybersecurity Research and Development. So there's a lot going into this. From our perspective in the NCSC, there are 5 things that have to happen next, collectively, at a national level and at a European level. The first one is that we need to defend forward. That doesn't necessarily mean offensive action, although it might. What it particularly means is we're going to bring in the next couple of months a revised national cybersecurity bill into the Oireachtas. That will involve, first of all, the transposition of NIS2, which I'll come to in a moment, but also expanded powers for the NCSC to do a lot more to detect and respond to incidents and vulnerabilities. It will involve powers for us to monitor and potentially block aspects of particular incidents and attacks. It will involve what we call NCDS, or National Cyber Defence Services, which is a form of active cyber defence in UK terminology, which essentially means our ability to identify vulnerabilities, compel people to fix them in some cases, and do a lot of other work in the background as well on suspicious email reporting and other issues. It would also involve NIS2. So to pause on that for a second, NIS1, like I said, 125 entities. NIS2, about 4,000 entities in the state. Okay? Objectively, that's a huge change. However, it's also far greater than that because it obliges entities to take a much more detailed set of security measures. Those security measures will be published over the next couple of months, and we're going to consult on some of those. We hope we are going to have a framework of security measures. That is to say, entities of different scale and different sizes will be able to take different measures to meet their requirements. There is no one-size-fits-all here. We're going to use open, interoperable international frameworks to the fullest extent possible. We're also very determined to avoid the creation of a bespoke 5 million person market for cybersecurity products and services. We're going to use international standards and international frameworks to ensure that Irish companies, if they sell into the Irish market, can sell into the European market and vice versa. Because there's no point us creating a market for 5 million people when we're part of a trade federation, if you like, of 450 million people. So that's one. We have a lot of work to do in defending better, shifting the dial left, taking incidents off the page before they ever get to us. That's one. The second thing we need to do is we need to build better systems. Okay? Some of this is purely technical. In government, for example, we have a series of challenges around government infrastructure. Mass obsolescence in some cases, aging out of particular infrastructure, a slow cloud transition. These have to be addressed, and the strategy will aim to deal with a lot of those questions. We also have substantial issues in telcos and other areas in the state where the actual security of critical infrastructure, as shown by Volta Typhoon in the US and elsewhere, is very vulnerable. There are real issues here. And those issues can affect every single person in the country who uses a mobile device. Much of this is not in the public domain, and we've been very lucky with Volta Typhoon. But some of the issues that some countries face as a consequence of these incidents are truly terrifying. And these are issues we have to address because sooner or later it'll come back to bite us. Beyond that, we also then have a series of issues around things like post-quantum cryptography. So we have a post-quantum transition coming. It's maybe 2, maybe 3 years away. Industry will deal with a lot of this, but any of the work we do in government and elsewhere to ensure that government systems are secure against post-quantum cryptography have to happen now, because the window is very, very narrow. And if we arrive at a situation where there is widespread use of quantum computing, and we're not ready, then nothing we've done will have worked. That's one. Next one. We also need to build better partnerships. For example, we have very strong partnerships with a variety of different sectoral stakeholder groups. There's a phrase. Through a system we call the cores. Now, cores are like ISACs, but on steroids. They're coordination and response groups. We have them established in government. It's called GovCore. We have a local government core. We have one in transport, energy, and so on. DigiCore is another obvious, very important one. These cores are groups of CISOs and relevant officials from sectors who sit with us once a quarter. We train them, we deliver them, give them briefings, and we listen to them as to what their risks, challenges, and issues are. It's a way of us building a stakeholder group that we can use to build a community in the state, not just with us, but between each other, but also in incidents, and CrowdStrike is a great case in point. It's a way of us directly getting in touch with our stakeholders and finding out what's actually affecting them, what the issue is. We need to do a lot more of that, deeper and wider. We also need to build much better engagement with industry, and not just government to industry, but industry to industry, to collectively understand and share the level of risk and the issues that are actually occurring. Commercial sensitivities and all of that are an issue, obviously. Now, Some of this will be dealt with by means of the EU Cyber Solidarity Act. Don't ask, you'll hear about it in due course. But essentially that will involve a network of European SOCs reporting into a central European incident response centre. And we'll be the Irish one, unsurprisingly. So this is a developing piece that will be made clearer during the strategy process, which essentially will allow us all to share information at a high level. We don't want anybody's personal information. Okay, lastly, we also have a substantial set of challenges in the international sphere, in the diplomatic sphere. We've worked closely with our colleagues in Ukraine for many years now. We fund some of their support services, and we work on their behalf in doing some analytical work. It suits us. We learn what the state of the art is in terms of incidents in Ukraine. However, this is just a start. The partnerships we use in Europe and elsewhere will have to deepen, become much stronger, because the nature of the challenges we all know we face aren't going to go away. They're going to become more serious. So collectively, at a national and European level, these partnerships will have to grow. And then lastly, we also need to understand risk better at a national level. So some of this is in the public domain already. We have a series of national exercises in the recent past, one on energy, which is public, Operation Dara, which looked at how the state will respond to serious risks in the physical, cyber, and other domains. How do we deal with those issues? Collectively, nationally, we need to fuse that information together better, not just to be able to respond better, but to be able to challenge and make more resilient our systems properly. That's happening, and the review of national security structures, which will be made public in the next little while, does that very effectively. We also need to coordinate better, including civil-military coordination and coordination with police authorities. We do a lot of work with the Defence Forces and the Gardaí, but there's always room for improvement. As the National Cyber Defence Command is fully established and grows, we'll need to be able to work with them very closely to ensure that we're collectively, properly manage that fusion between civilian and military risk. And then lastly, the obvious one, we need to commit. The reason I started with the fact that the 90s are over is down to the fact that that's a startling realization for people. We've all become very used to, whether we choose to accept it or not, to Pax Americana. It's the idea that whatever happens, that there is, the 82nd Airborne will arrive, and the US Air Force or the US Navy will arise. And that's just not an issue for us, it's an issue for all of Europe. The idea that we can arrive at a process 3 or 4 years from now where there's further military action in Eastern Europe and we're not ready will pose really serious challenges for us here. We are, of course, thousands of kilometres away from any potential military conflict in Eastern Europe, but we're precisely 0 kilometres away from a cyber incident. And that's a fundamental issue for us all to try and deal with. Thank you, everybody.